Recorded this.
Okay.
Hi.
Yay.
So today is we're in August of 2024, just for a frame of reference, and we are Jill Clifton and Sunny Lindley, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we got to know each other, first of all, because that's a great story about a lot of the principles that turns out infuse both of our work. Sunny, do you want to say anything to set the stage about like who you are and what you're
Sure.
up to?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm Sunny Lindley, and I identify myself as an eco artist, a resiliency coach. Um, those are my primary identities. And I also have a program called the Family Crest Program that helps families to determine their values and to live according to their values so that they can really be the change that they want to be able to see in the world. So, and feeling extra warm and fuzzy today because Jill is one of my favorite people in the whole world. And you didn't mention that you wrote an incredible book called Landscape of Mothers.
Mm-hmm.
And your work with the Landscape of Mothers is this beautiful synchronicity, I feel like, with the work that I did with my Family Crest program. And so, yeah, we're here to share some of our mutual intentions and that space where we overlap in the work that we've been doing around our own families and the offerings that we both want to contribute to other families. And so, yeah, I'm excited to get started by sharing our story because I think that our story of our relationship is super foundational in what kind of what relationships could look like in mothers supporting each other and really just female friendships in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we were lucky to get to know each other because of somebody else who knew that we were both doing parent mentoring kind of work and
Mhm.
thought we would be a good fit, and we are. Our work is so synchronous in terms of what we're trying to do. Um, yeah, and one of the beauties of, I think, of us working together or having conversations together is that Landscape of Mothers has sort of a big picture, kind of orienting ourselves in like the bigness of where we are, to make our choices. And I think that can be really good for, like you said, our values, kind of like that dreaming into the thing that could be, that we want to see in the world. And then your work is so deeply ingrained in the same principles of showing up by our values, but it's also from that perspective, like, how do I do that like today with the people who are in my household? And so it's so grounded, and so just, yeah, our work feels so complementary. It's really lovely. And then it's all built on this too, this personal experience that we had together 2 years ago now. So
Almost happened by accident, right? Like it was
yeah.
all just very spontaneous. Like we met in the nest, we were
Hmm.
connected by Jen, and we had a couple of brief conversations, which led into a few more like deeper conversations. And then like, from my perspective, I feel like in that we realized, like, wow, this could be like a really like a soul friend. Like, sure, there's these wonderful ways we could collaborate in terms of our offerings in the world, but just as a human, like, wow, this could be like a real soul friend. And then we had even deeper conversations that were a lot more personal and understood each other's kind of challenges and vulnerabilities and strengths. And I feel like we were kind of supporting each other in that way, just being like phone friends, you
Right.
know? Yeah. And
Yeah.
then, and then let's talk about what happened with.
So we got thrown into the deep end a little bit. So there was this budding friendship of like, oh, we have these similarities. We both have, similar views of what we want to see in the world, what we think is important, what we think is missing. And so we had these sort of global things. And then all of a sudden, Um, my mom happened to live maybe 15 minutes from where Sunny lives. And my mom died unexpectedly. Well, it was 10 years in the making, but it was also like, it wasn't obvious that it was happening at the moment it happened. Um, so I came to town when I got the call from the doctor saying, like, if you want to see her, you need to get here. So I drove overnight, got there at 4 o'clock in the morning, and my mom passed away at the hospital at 4:30 in the morning. So then I was just left with her stuff. I didn't know where anything was. I didn't know what to do with anything. And um, I felt a little lost. So, as we can be when something really big, really life-changing happens in a moment and we have to reorient from whatever else we were up to, right? So
Yeah.
because of proximity, though, you were the first person I thought of when I was like, I do not know what to do. My husband had to get my kids back to their respective schools. And so he took on the mantle of taking care of the family while I sat in Medford trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
So,
Want to share a little bit about the context too, and I also want to share the context of like coming into that time period, but the context about getting your daughter to college and like what the timing was with all that, because I think that was a big part of it too, is that you were sandwiched in your, family of making responsibilities and your family of origin responsibilities. And I think that's such a common experience. And I was too. So it was another place we met.
right. So yeah, so it turned out in just timing I could never have guessed, or it almost sounds like a joke. My daughter was moving from California to Seattle to go to college. And so we were in Seattle. She was supposed to move into the dorms on August 20th. So it was August 19th, and we were shopping, and it was literally while we were shopping that I had my mom's health app on my phone, and I'd gotten no phone calls. I think they called me just based on things they said in conversations, but anyway, the way I found out was that these alerts started popping up on my mom's labs, and I saw that she was in the emergency room. And so I called them, and they gave me straight to the doctor, who basically said, your mom's had a heart attack and you need to get here.
Mhm.
But I'm literally looking around. I'm in Seattle at REI. We're buying like rain jackets and things that she's going to need in Seattle, right? And so I'm looking at all these people shopping, and the disparity between worlds was just insane. And so like my family came out they were buying things as I was like, I think I need to check in on this. And so they came out, and I said, we called my mom Alma as like the grandparent word in our family. So I said, Alma's in the hospital and it looks bad. So we need to think about what we're going to do. And yeah, I mean, it was my family was really sweet. We just decided we needed to like cut whatever we were doing, head back to the hotel, and then we needed to like rearrange. We just needed to figure out what was going to happen next. Um, and then we each took little bits of tasks that needed to happen. Somebody had to go talk to the front desk. Somebody had to start changing airline tickets. Somebody had to see if Phoebe could get her stuff moved into college soon. If we just drop things in her room,
Right.
because we had too much stuff at that point for the car that we had. And so we all took tasks and we started trying to organize.
Wow.
So that was where I was at that moment, that it was an absolute redirect. And
Yeah.
yes,
You
a
were in
sandwich
this,
between doing what needed to be done for my
yeah,
family that I was creating, and then also my family of origin. So yeah.
yeah. And there's this sort of theme of like your daughter's launching into adulthood by going to college and you're losing your mom like
Mhm.
at the same time. Like that's such a intense two things to be happening at once, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I came in, like, I walked into it just absolutely over brimming with like places to put that needed my attention, things that needed to happen. And yeah, so it was really overwhelming. Yeah.
And what I remember about that moment when I got a phone call from you and you said, I'm in Medford and my mom died. And I think the first thing that you were asking for was, did I know anybody who could fix her car?
Yeah.
Because you were going to have to drive her car back home to California.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that was like the first thing. And the context of my life at that point was, and this was part of what you and I were having these deep conversations about right before that, was that I had lost in total over 6 years time, I lost 6 family members. So like all kind of in short order, like my sister passed away, then my dad passed away, then my mom passed away, then my brother passed away, those ones. And then there was a few others that I won't talk about right now. But so it was like most of my family of origin had all passed away, and some of them in pretty dramatic, preventable circumstances, and some just from old age and fairly normal circumstances. But nonetheless, I was feeling very, very alone in the world, and experiencing really complicated grief is what I would say, because my relationship with my mom and my dad had been strained in many ways from some abuse that went on in my childhood. And so grieving my family was very messy. And
Yeah.
at the same time of grieving my all of these deaths of family members in my family of origin, I also had just been, as it happened for many people during the pandemic, like all kinds of huge changes. Um, I had lost my relationship of 3 years, and we had been engaged, and our engagement broke, and we had split up. And then my kids, my last son finally moved out. So I was having like, the breakup, all the family deaths, plus empty nest. And then on top of all of that, I had an artisan business that I was running, a screen printing business. And in 2019, I sold that business so that I could go more into therapeutic services, doing coaching, resiliency coaching, parenting coaching, and teaching people to grow gardens, and still doing the art, but doing a different form of art. And so, in the process of selling that business, I also got disconnected from the people that were my community, which was the artisan community. And if you've ever really spent a long time in artisan community, you know that it's very special. It's like everyone shows up at one place for an artisan market, and it's like you make a little village for the time that you're there, and then you break that village down, and then you come back and do it again next weekend, and everybody becomes like family. And so selling my business was like losing my independent source of income and a whole community of people that I was connected to. And without having that business to run, I didn't have a reason to be going to the markets and be connected to them. So I was just very much like hanging out there in the universe, like in this huge transition, like maybe I should be celebrating my freedom from my family of origin and from my kids moving out. But I didn't feel celebratory at all. I felt devastated. I felt like a refugee, or like, you know, I felt like my whole country had been bombed or something. It was like my whole world had blown up. And um, you were just a very um, comforting, healing person for me to touch base with during a time of like, lots of ugly crying and serious attachment, like very vulnerable attachment stuff. And our conversations were so deep and real because we could kind of tease apart all of these attachment things related to our own like families of origin. And so I don't know if you feel like sharing a little bit about, your own, a little bit about like what your family of origin was like. And because one thing I think is really unique too, that also makes us such a good pairing for facilitating work with families, is our unique but similar ways that we're could be non-traditional family, right?
Right.
And so I'll share a little bit about how I'm a non-traditional family, but I'm just curious if you feel like sharing a little bit about that and what your relationship with your mom was like, that how what that
Yeah.
was that you were bringing to the table too.
Right. So that was a place that we definitely connected that sense of the messy grief.
Mhm.
Right. So even as this was all like exploding and brand new for me, and yours had been sort of this like thunderstorm of a rumble, for a while,
Yeah.
we could meet in that place where our grief was complicated. And I mean, so often grief is complicated. But so for me and my mom and I had always been, uh, we'd been in this weird, like close but distant relationship, which is to say, um, you know, that I felt like I never really felt seen or heard by her. And then she didn't always pick up all of the responsibilities of being a parent. And so I started doing that really, really young. And ultimately, I just ended up feeling like I was always the grown up in the room. My mom didn't have a lot of emotional skills. She had a lot of avoidance. And, so she had a lot of skills and tools around avoidance. Um, and she just, I think, to be somewhat generous with her, is I think she just had such deep woundings that it was hard for her to see outside of her experience.
Yeah.
But that left me as a kid, taking care of my brother and myself because my parents got divorced when we were very young.
Mm.
And we just had a really tough and often contentious relationship. In fact, I had been there the month um, before she died, trying to help her get things done. And she just fought me to the nail, with just trying to set up like bill pay stuff. And so, because she was starting to have trouble with memory and cognitive
Right.
function stuff. So, um, yeah, I felt like she always had wanted my help, but always resisted my help at the same time. And so everything that I did to help her always felt like it was a fight to get it done. And so we just had this not super comfortable relationship around that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm curious I mean, I'd like to share some ways that I feel like a non-traditional mother. And one of them is, the attachment stuff that was difficult growing up. I had a very hard time developing a secure attachment with my mother. Um,
Mhm.
and mostly just from not feeling protected. But then in my own family of creation, I um, my first son was born when I was 19, and his dad and I didn't stay together for very long, only about 11 months. And we split up, and then I got together with my second two children's dad, and he and I were together for 6 years, had two beautiful children together, and then he suddenly died when the kids were very little. And so um, I spent, 25 years raising three kids, all alone, like no other parent. And then because my parents were, they always were kind of like really hands off as in terms of being grandparents. Like it was really hard even just to get my mom to like come to one of my kids' birthday parties or something. And she definitely wasn't, going to be babysitting or helping me with things. It just wasn't what she was into. And my dad was really supportive, but he also, worked a full-time job and wasn't really much of a babysitter. So I was really on my own with the three kids, and managed to put myself through college and get myself into, a decent position in life, which is only getting better, but it's really, really rough. It's hard to be a single parent in America under capitalism. I think it's extra hard to be a widowed single parent, with three boys, um, under capitalism in America. It's so
Yeah.
that's some of the ways I feel like a non-traditional parent. Um, and I'm curious if
Yeah.
there's things that you want to share about feeling some ways of being non-traditional.
Right. So I would say my parenting journey started almost at the beginning of my life. Like I said, I basically stepped into a parental role really, really young, and I took care of my brother a lot. Um, and and so when I was 18, or when I was 17, I got pregnant, and when I was 18, I gave birth to a baby girl. And when I was pregnant, there was the whole like, do I keep her? Like, what do I do about this, right? And my plan had been to go to college. I had applied already, and my parents were highly educated, and so had a value for this education to happen. Um, and my mom just made it really clear that her her choice for me was that I would place the baby for adoption and that I would go ahead and go to college. And she took steps to make sure that that was really kind of the only option I had, which was to say that she said she would never help me. She didn't want to have any, like, she was just, my brother was about to leave home, and that she just had a couple years left with him, and basically actually at that time she had already washed her hands of parenting, and she didn't really do any of it anymore. So and yeah, so she said, no help, no whatever. Um and I didn't have a support system. So when I found out I was pregnant, I had moved in with my mom, who had, for various reasons, moved away from my stepfather. I had stayed with him initially. When I realized I was pregnant, I went to live with my mom, but this was a new town. I had no friends. So I couldn't see how I could possibly pull this off, right? With my mom actively telling me, I'm not going to help you. Like, I won't do anything. So, I did choose the adoption routes. I placed her for adoption in 1988, and went on to college, totally unsupported. So I had a whole mother grief. Like, I was just in a dark pool of mother grief and
Uh,
stuff for a couple of years. And then it got to the point where I was almost failing out of college. And my dad's solution to this was, well, you know, I'm not going to pay your tuition if you don't get good grades, right? So, which makes sense. Like, if that wasn't an unreasonable, but that was the response to my grief, or that's what it felt like.
yeah.
Was basically like, pull your shit together and make this happen, right? And I don't really care how you do it. You just need to make this look better.
Right.
Um, and so, yeah, that was my early parenting. That whole thing turned into, um, well, I let it sit for a long time. So I think it like simmered underneath for a long time. And then I got married when I was 30. And when my husband started, we had talked about kids before, and I was a little like, maybe, I don't know. He started being like, let's start a family. That kind of unearthed all that grief, and all of that came back. And then I had a miscarriage, and fertility things got harder. And so that's a whole story in itself. But basically what that means is it sort of tore the scab off of that really deep mother wound of having lost, sort of by choice, somewhat, that complicated mess, my first baby.
Mm.
And so I think that informs a lot too of how I perceive like family ties. Like, I didn't know then how important all of the family ties were. And I don't mean necessarily that any obligation comes out of them, but in that realm of attachment and attachment wounds, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I just want to ask, after sharing that, Jill, like, how do you feel about, like, how are you feeling right now? Because when I hear that story, I'm
Mhm.
like, oh man, like, I feel that, and
Yeah.
yet you seem pretty resourceful and good, but just wanted to.
Well, part of it is I've reconnected with that baby girl, and who is now, I to call her a baby girl, she's 35.
Yeah.
So, she now has two children that I am an active grandma to. And so things have come around into a good space, but we had to do a lot of addressing wounds and a lot of reattachment behaviors, and knowing what those were was really helpful to me in making those overtures to her once she had contacted me. So,
Yeah, that's such an amazing story to me. It's just one of the things I really admire about your, bumpy, challenging journey that you've just navigated with such incredible heart and courage. And just love that you like are always continuing to like do your work and pay attention to the attachment and value the relationships and, keep these threads of really important values through all of it, through some really difficult stuff. And I love that you brought in, did you say attachment? Um, did you say attachment repairs, or there was a word that you used just now?
yeah, I think I said something about like repairing attachment wounds,
Yeah, well, that
tending
really
to them.
brings me to, and I think it brings us to a good point to talk about what happened with us, because I remember the word that you used was that we were creating a new experience so that we were sort of healing old attachment wounds by creating this new experience. And that's one of the things that I just feel is so powerful. So going back to like that moment when, you're trying to get your daughter to college and it's interrupted by suddenly your mom passing away. And then instead of being with your family in this event of getting your daughter to college, now you're alone in an apartment, in your mom's apartment, and she's dead. And you're like, I have to deal with her stuff. I have to figure out what to do. I'm alone. And you called me and you said, do you know anybody who, like a mechanic, who could look at the car? And I'm like, oh, yeah, totally. And what's going on? And you were like, uh, I'm, and started to kind of spill out what was really going on. And if
Yeah.
I remember correctly, I was like, wow, like, I'm coming to you right now. Can I just come to you right now? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, when we get into those places, it's so easy to think like, okay, I have to solve a problem. But instead of asking for somebody to just be present. And so I felt so lucky that when I was in that place of like, okay, I'm going to solve some problems, the car needs to get fixed. And I called you, that even though my orientation was toward my car getting fixed, we had another kind of relationship already started in which we were like, how are we together in this parenting thing? We had described these more like rooted systems, right? And we had talked about them. I didn't realize it was time to put them in play. You did.
Yeah.
And so when you got the call and you're like, wait, what's going on? Like, how are you? And I'm like, well, my mom died. And you're like, okay, you were the one who was like, this is a big deal. Cause I think I was still trying to keep it under control in my world, right? So I was trying to keep it small. And you said you were available or, that you could come and that, and so I remember I actually don't remember how all that beginning happened. So maybe I need to rely on you for that. I just remember you bringing other people with you and finding me. I vividly remember just being on the floor and I had managed piles of things, but I just didn't know what I was doing anymore. Like my brain couldn't sort. And I remember you coming in and being like, just tell me about the piles. And so I
Uh,
named all of them and you were like, okay, this one we can do. And this one you need to do. And I remember being like, oh, thank goodness. Like somebody could see it and process it and organize it. I think that I was probably 2 days in already at that point. So I was just completely overwhelmed.
yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
What I remember is I got the call from you one day and got you connected with somebody with the car. And then you called me back the next day and said that totally worked. Like I was able to help with the car or whatever. And I was like, okay, what's next? And then that day I came to just kind of like see the situation and like try to understand what needed to happen and what your time frame was and what the resources were and whatnot. And so I remember coming one day and just like being with you, just be like, okay, how is Jill? And you know, and kind of assessing it. And then it seemed like more help was going to be needed than just the two of us, because it was kind of a lot of stuff to get to its appropriate places. And so I
And
think
I
it
also
was the,
remember it had it had kind of blown up because my brother decided not to come to town, but what he did was sent two friends that he knew from the military to help me move furniture. But it was way premature
right,
because moving furniture was not the first thing I needed to do, but that
right,
was when they were available. So they'd come in and moved some stuff, and that meant I had created these chaotic piles.
right,
And
right.
that's when you came up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I remember, after looking around and seeing what all needed to be done and realizing, okay, when you leave here, you have to leave here in your mom's car. So you have to leave with only the amount of stuff that's going to fit in your mom's car. So everything else has to find another place to be. Um, and then realized that more help was going to be needed for that. And I was actually in a really challenging time in my relationship with my son, who had just had a baby. And I get along well most of the time with his wife, but we have had our challenges. And he was kind of going through a period of not spending very much time with me, and I was missing him, and I really wanted to be around the baby more. But I knew that where he was at in his sort of like attachment journey and development journey was he was like individuating still, so he didn't really want to hang out with me. But if I called him and I said, I know somebody else who needs help, that he would jump right on it because that's just the heart that he has. So it's interesting how asking him to come and help with your situation with your grief and navigating the stuff that needed to get moved from your mom's place was a good call to action for my son, where he did show up, was happy to show up, and he and his wife Tashina and baby Katya, they were taking turns with her in the little pack, and we started just like organizing, cleaning, packing, sorting, moving, and it ended up feeling really joyful actually because baby
Yeah.
Katya was there making her
Mhm.
cute little baby noises, and
Mhm.
Oren and Tashina were just very positive and uplifting. And I
Mhm.
feel like I remember that kind of creating space where you could just sit on the floor with a pile of papers that only you could sort, and you could just sort those things, and we could sort of take care of the rest. And
Yeah.
um
And I remember just that energy, like you said, the baby being there, that was so sweet. And so she brought this tenderness, as babies do. And, you know, um, them parenting her and holding her and stuff also just brought that like caring to it. So it's not, I mean, they also did a lot of work. They packed my mom's entire kitchen, I think, that day and sorted which could get taken to different places and stuff. And so much work. And what the thing that really sticks with me though is the energy of it, the fact that they were willing to come and help a stranger, and when my family who usually would be there for me to help me do things had things they were really like they needed to be other places um and so that movement that was happening in the kitchen helped me sort the papers, right? It was setting like an energy in the space that allowed me to keep moving through instead of just blankly like staring at each page being like I don't even know.
mm,
So they moved that stuck energy. They got some things done, and the baby was just brought a real sweetness to
yeah,
something that's really hard to do.
I know.
Mm.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
so grateful for your whole family.
It was just such a beautiful moment, like all the way around. And I know that another thing that was really fantastic for me was that I was feeling this incredible isolation in a different way. Like you were feeling really isolated because while your family would love to be there, they were doing like good, important things in the world that they had to do. And so, you were just kind of like there on your own. And the loneliness that I was feeling was like my most of my family died, and like and then all of these other losses. And so I was feeling this like um there's a unique thing about the empty nest where you kind of, for me anyway, it was like I was wondering like, well, how am I useful?
Mhm.
Like, how am I useful if I'm not a mom? Like, I hadn't yet found like what is the gifts that I'm giving giving? How am I expressing my purpose if it's not through parenting, you know?
Right.
Um, and so I was in that space. And so just the fact of you needing some help, it like really pulled me out of a deep depressive funk
Mm.
and allowed me to like step in and feel purposeful and useful. And then here's the thing that we've talked about so much that is just amazing. And it's built into my Family Crest program in that it's the piece where it takes many people to make things work in a really lovely, life affirming, positive way. And it's something that we really modeled in that interaction where, um, for myself, like if I had been tasked with having to navigate something like you were navigating, and it was my own thing, I wouldn't have been able to do it either. My brain would have been like, I can't organize, I can't follow through, be resourceful, make the phone calls, open the doors, check the box, dot the I's, cross the T's. Like I can't do that when I'm grieving and in a trauma response, you know? But I could step into your situation and do that. But there were things in my own life that I was really struggling with. Like at the time, I was struggling financially. And so I remember was kind of over like a 3-day period. I think day number one, you and I just like hauled a whole bunch of stuff to secondhand stores. And then day number two, I think, was when my son came and we kind of sorted through more stuff, or it was something like that. And then there was like the third day, I was going to come back, and it was kind of just down to mostly needing to pack your car, maybe taking a couple more loads or whatever. And I remember that morning I called you and I was like, I so want to come there right now. And I literally don't have the money for gas. Like, like my financial situation is so bad because I'm in this trauma space from all of this grief and loss that I was like, you know, so I felt totally available to help you and totally not able to solve my own problems. And the beautiful thing that happened was that on the phone in that conversation, you were like, what do you need right now? And I said to you, what do you need right now? And we both needed to eat. And um, and I remember we decided, okay, let's go get something to eat together, and we will sit down and we will lay all of our needs on the table. And your brain can solve my needs because your brain isn't in a trauma response about my needs. And my brain can solve your needs um, because yeah. So and that's what we did. We sat at a cute little Mexican restaurant, and I remember that conversation really vividly because it was this moment of like, if everyone could be this way with each other, this would be a completely different world.
Right.
It would be completely different. And I think it was one of my first experiences of, this makes me feel really emotional actually, but it was one of my first experiences of like being mothered by a peer, by an equal, and like genuinely feeling cared for no matter what, you know? And like that you had the resources in that moment, even though you in your own stuff were feeling so unresourceful, you know, but that you did have the resources to care for me and I had the resources to care for you. We just needed to find where they matched.
Right.
And we did that, and managed to come up with a plan that helped solve some of my immediate things. And I remember, you were like, okay, just brainstorm. You're like, just off the top of your head, like, what are all the things that are overwhelming you? I'm just going to write a list while you tell them all to me. And then we're going to prioritize the list. And then we're going to come up with, 3 possible solutions to each of these problems or whatever. And you actually like wrote it all down.
Mhm.
Um, and I was able to go home with a paper. So it was like we figured out what the immediate solutions were, and then I was able to go home with a paper that was like, okay, this is my task the next 2 weeks to like follow through on these things. And so that gave me this the structure and the grounding that I needed to navigate through that really traumatic time for me. And then I was able to step in and give some structure that you needed to navigate that time for you. And I just think that was the piece later that you said that that was like the repairing of attachment wounds. It was like having a new experience, where for both of us, we'd had many experiences of getting in a traumatic place and then people responding to us in like a victim blaming way, or kind of like you were saying, when your dad's response to you probably being really depressed in college and struggling with your grades, and him being like, well, I'm not going to pay for college if you don't get your grades up. And it's like, okay, what you really need is some love, compassion. Like, how can I support you? Maybe we should be paying for therapy, and or maybe you need to take a break. Like, can I pay for you to take a little vacation? Like, those would be things that would be much more supportive. And in our way that we were, interacting with each other, it was like, oh, this is how it could be.
Right.
You
And there were so many principles that, after the fact I could point to. So we just did it. It just was in that moment. And it was later that we reflected on it, where I think we had multiple conversations about, like, one of them being, that there was no like saved and savior in the
Right,
situation, right? We were both struggling in particular ways, and we were both really competent in other ways. Um, And that when we allowed each of us to be whole people, both to have needs while I'm helping you, or, you to have needs while helping me, and then me to be able to acknowledge those needs and meet you there too, meant that we came as very whole people. We didn't come, nobody was broken, nobody was unsavable, nobody needed a savior, nobody needed anything to be perfect, nobody needed the other person to step in. And like, it just was this beautiful meeting of two whole autonomous human beings with skills they could offer each other in a moment where they were both struggling. And for me, that was such a reparative moment in such deep ways around, you know, um, what help looks like, what it means, what you're allowed to bring to it, what kind of hierarchy comes out of, oh, I'm the resource and you're the one who needs the resource, like, and since none of that was there, um, I felt like we got so much closer too. Like, it was just so beautiful to be seen as struggling, but also totally competent. That really helped me like navigate all of my parts. And then also to see, um, to see you as struggling and also really competent, like kind of shattered a lot of that, like, one person has it and one person doesn't kind of thing that we're so steeped in, right?
right. And yeah, and one of the things that's making me think of right now is that, you know, I think that you agree. We've talked about this before, but our model for like the traditional marriage in our culture is kind of a model, you could say, of codependency, where it's like, neither is autonomous. It's kind of modeled after this idea that neither is autonomous, which of course is because of patriarchy, and we're trying to change all these things. But in general, I think the model is kind of a codependent model. And yet, I think what we were doing in that situation was the opposite of the codependent model, right? There was no, victim savior. Um, it was expected and understood that we both are completely capable of all the things to be dignified, independent, autonomous human beings, you know? And yet we all go through really challenging things like the death of a parent, or things like that. And so by meeting each other in that way, we were both able to maintain our dignity and also be completely vulnerable,
Mhm.
like utterly vulnerable. Like, I need to fall apart like a jellyfish, and I need you to be, the glass that's holding me. And I feel like we were able to do that for each other. It's like you were the glass and I was the jellyfish, and I
Mhm.
was the glass and you were the jellyfish. And we just kind of like held each other's vulnerability inside structure
Mhm.
for a while, almost like borrowing each other's hearts or something.
Mhm.
Um, and and it made it possible for us both to just get through it, you know?
Right. And we were able to do it but we both got through what was important, what we were struggling with, um, together, and without having to compartmentalize our own selves, right? That was where our vulnerability kind of came from, was that instead of me being like, oh, I'm here to help Sunny figure out this list, like I'm just not going to bring up all these things that are happening at my mom's house. Like we were both well aware, and we
Mhm.
both communicated well what we were struggling with. And we
Yeah.
didn't ignore, like we didn't push any of that off to the side, which meant we didn't compartmentalize ourselves. And so we didn't compartmentalize what we were doing together.
Right.
And that let us kind of have um, this open space where we could just kind of offer back and forth, like, oh, I'm the glass. Oh, you're the glass. Oh, I'm the glass.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, and I think some of the context that was really meaningful at the time too was that in 21 or 22?
22.
22. So, that was actually really close to when I had lost my brother too.
Yeah.
And part of the reason I was struggling financially so bad was that I had this really fantastic job that I loved, but it, I was in that job when I lost my brother. And I really tried to like just keep going and realized after a couple of months, I was like, I can't just keep going. Like I need to take a break. This has just been too much death. And and so I didn't at the time have a job. And
Right.
um uh but the other context was that this was, well into the pandemic. And
Mhm.
we had seen culturally how people were sort of becoming very siloed in all these their like sort of own little political camps or whatever and belief systems. And a lot of that had to do with how we respond to vulnerability and what care is available for who based on their identities, their beliefs, their whatever. And so, I feel like kind of in the bigger cultural context, we were also practicing how we show up with care, respecting one another's belief systems, respecting one another's dignity. Um, like, neither of us was trying to convince the other that what we said we needed wasn't what we needed. There was never a point when I was like, this is what I need. And you were like, are you sure that's what you need? Maybe it would make more sense for this or whatever. Like there was none of that happening. Like you said, this is what I need. And I'd be like, here's three ways we can do it.
Mhm.
Pick one. And I would say, this is what I need. And you'd say, here's three ways we can do it. Pick one.
Mhm.
And there was never that like questioning each other.
Mhm.
And so there was a way that it felt to me um, like we were practicing the kind of mutual aid that just seems so idyllic that I
Mhm.
wish people had been practicing throughout the entire pandemic, you know?
Right. We believed each other. We came up with lots of possibilities. We maintained autonomy. You always got to choose, or because on the table also always felt like none of those. What else? Like
Yeah,
I don't think we did that at any point, but like I think I would have felt totally comfortable being if you were like, here's the three things, and I'd be like, no, like I don't know, but it's not those, right? Like we could just keep going. So yeah, all of those we had talked about. And then when this situation came to be, we just behaved in those ways that were rooted in our values and our belief systems. And it wasn't even until later in some of this conversation that we were like, oh, look, we did the thing.
yeah,
We we practiced the things we valued.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like we had had all these really deep connective conversations leading up to that, where we were really supporting each other and developing our relationship, but we also were having pretty deeply intellectual conversations that were about, very philosophical about what was going on in our world and how
Mhm.
then that filters down into impacting what's going on in our families. And you know, I feel like there is almost an academic rigor to the conversations that we were having in addition to them being connective. And so it was this wonderful praxis that
Right.
was happening, um, that had like no performativeness to it at all. It was just like, I'm showing up real and you're showing up real, and we're just like trading vulnerabilities and strengths until
Mhm.
it makes sense and it goes, you know?
Right.
It was just really beautiful. And I wanna say it's, my clock is saying 1:16, and I have somebody coming at 1:30, so I am gonna have to
Okay.
wrap up, but, I
Yeah.
have an idea about wrapping up, but I don't wanna
Oh,
interrupt
you
you.
do. Okay. So we can kind of go both ways. I can throw out my idea, you can throw out yours, and then we'll do whatever like
Yeah,
grabs us. Because I was thinking about like when I reflect back on that and I think about like wanting to ever like recreate it or something, like what were the elements that were there that were our personal practices maybe or something that came into that, or things we'd been working on personally that supported us being able to show up in that way instead of in a power differential kind of way.
yeah,
So that was my question to like leave
yeah, no,
you,
I
but
really like that question, and, yeah, I was thinking, um, some of what could be really good for, like, wrapping up the conversation is around, well, we're intending to try and have some more ongoing conversations that
Mhm.
are more specifically related to parenting. Um, I kind of lost my train of thought here when I was like
Mm.
thinking about like, okay, how would we wrap this up? Because I was like, actually, it's kind of late. I have to go soon. Like, um, let's see if I can get my thought back again. Um, Yeah, I think that I might have just lost it. And so now I'm just trying to draw
Sorry.
upon like the conversation that we had before this, like leading up. We were like, okay, and then I think one of those questions was what you just asked, which is what were the specific practices that we were doing or principles and values that we were kind of operating on that allowed us to show up in that way.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know when I like to kind of just go with this question because like we will have more um conversations, but I think maybe you froze too. Oh, there you are. Okay. Um,
mhm,
just to so we can always have more conversations. We can keep revisiting questions.
yeah.
But I feel like when I look back and I think just about my half of the participation in that time, I feel like I'd worked really hard to trust myself for a long time. That is trust like the emotions that were coming, the needs that I had. I had been practicing communicating them to other people. And so I had some practice in that vulnerability. And I felt like I had strong reasons to trust that you were a person who would meet that vulnerability, and you did, right? And very
I remember
holy.
both of us were being very direct. I
Hmm.
remember like not, you know, not trying to like cloak things in, would you mind if, and what if this, and we weren't, you know, like I just remember both of us being really direct,
Hmm.
and that feeling really refreshing for both of us.
Right, because we were in a situation that needed some amount of efficiency too, and I think we just very kindly stepped right into just being, yeah, direct. I
Yeah.
remember a night of you saying like, "I know I was going to come over tonight, and I can't. I'm tired, and whatever." And I was like, "Okay, well, we both need to eat. Can I bring you dinner?" And then I'll go back home or whatever, and then so we made our decisions, and it was like, and a yes is fine and a no is totally fine. Like,
Yeah.
but I know we both need something here. And so I think I did end up bringing you dinner because of the
Yeah.
food.
So,
Yeah, so there were just directness was another one. Um, so, and I think also by then I had learned to trust vulnerability a little bit more than because I kind of grew up under a paradigm where like anything vulnerable was dangerous, right?
Yeah.
And so
You know
I,
what the other thing was that was a practice for us both that we connected on that I'm just remembering was we were both holding our dollies.
that's right.
We
Oh
both
God.
had this
Yeah.
practice of like really tuning in with that young inner child part.
Mhm.
And we were like hanging out with our dollies and sleeping with our dollies and taking naps with our dollies and like being with our dollies.
Yeah.
You were the only person I'd ever met at that point that like had a dolly and actually did like an adult reparenting practice
Hmm.
of like being with the little part of yourself as the mom, the big part of
Right.
yourself. And so I think there was that piece too where we really connected on that, where like we could both be present with our inner child and our adult resourceful self.
Hmm.
And we were meeting each other in both those places.
Right. Oh, I had forgotten that practice. That's very sweet to bring that back. So we were so rooted in a sense of care for the vulnerable and the tiny and the needy, right? Like, um, and so that was part of that foundation of how we came in there. And when there was stuff, and but it was on top of this foundation of like we knew we had both been working on care and vulnerability and also capacity, like our ability to care for, and then to be able to trade that care. It was just,
Yeah, and I'm curious to hear from you, just like a wrapping up, like how is your life different after that experience? Because I really want to share how my life is different because it's not a small thing. Like my life is actually really different after that experience in terms of my relational self and the ways that I can clearly say that my life is different is in that practice of trusting my vulnerability, like you said, you're practicing, and I've been practicing that too. I just don't question anymore. Like when I'm feeling really vulnerable and and I can identify what it is I need, I don't ever question it anymore. I'm just like, if what I need is to go buy some fish at the pet store, then like that's actually the right thing. You know what I mean? And it might not make any sense, but like that is what I need. Um and and that practice has helped me to like settle into myself in this way that um is a lot more like no bullshit, like I don't feel the need to apologize for my vulnerability anymore. And I don't feel the need to qualify my requests.
mhm,
And I'm not open to people picking apart my requests to see if it could be modified in some way that's more convenient for them. It's like, I just know what I need.
mhm,
And if in a connection, if someone is like, I can't provide that, and it's like a close relationship, I'm like, cool, totally get it. Not taking it personally at all. And if it's other circumstances where it's like somebody new, and I can express my need and they're like, "Are you sure you really need that?" I'm like, "I was done with you yesterday." Like, you know,
mhm.
like I have no time um
Yeah.
for questioning um my vulnerability and what I need and sort of what my core is telling me is the right path to go. And then the other piece is we didn't plan any of that circumstance. We It's like the universe just delivered a challenging circumstance that we could show up for each other in, where we left it feeling a part of our big parts of our attachment systems having been repaired through this connection with each other. And that actually has made me have so much more trust that I am held in the universe. That
Mhm.
that even when there is no human around who can help me when I feel really, really alone, that if I lay on the ground, I can feel the support of the universe. And I know that there is some force at work that has my back. and I
Mhm.
can't see it, I can't touch it, I don't know when it's gonna give me some kind of grace or some really difficult lesson or whatever it is, but it's there and I can trust it. And in general, I think every difficult thing that has come into my life since then, I've been able to not be shaken quite to the core as I had been prior to that. Like I have this trust in the universe that is allows me to feel more like, oh, here comes some really difficult stuff. I'm going to be able to handle this, you know?
Yeah, I would agree that that there's a trust in the universe part to what happened between us, which almost kind of sounds dramatic, but it's so true that I switched from kind of thinking that I was dreaming of this caring world where people could meet and interact in ways that took care of both and that somebody didn't have to be on top, right? And that um and so but I had never, so I dreamed of it, but I hadn't experienced it. And that experience with you gave me a visceral feeling of what that is. And so I feel like since then, I have more of a trust that that caring way of being together is like a real thing. It isn't
Right.
an imaginary
Not
thing that
just
I
a
have.
dream. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's not just like, oh, I'm so sad. I wish the world could be this way or whatever. It's like, no, the world can be this way. No, it
right,
actually can. Let's practice it today. Let's keep doing it.
right. And so I feel like this is where kind of like coming back to Landscape of Mothers and Family Crest is
Right.
Landscape of Mothers for me was that even though it Landscape of Mothers predated this experience, so it had already been in existence, but that sense of like, oh, all the places we had to visit in order to show up to each other in a way that was based in our values, right? So
Yeah.
that like all the work that we had done with being vulnerable or trusting our own voice or um shedding different ideas or whatever was all like lands we had traveled to in order to when this moment came up that we just automatically behaved according to our values.
Right.
um so that has that bigger
Oh,
context for me too. Yeah.
yes. Yeah. Like you could bring all of your former life experience into this current life experience with all of the gifts and gems from that former experience to bring
Mhm.
to this current experience. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and for me, I think those pieces, like what Family Crest brings, is practical steps.
Mhm.
Difficult circumstance that you're going through, if you can tune your brain to what is it that you want instead, instead of focusing on like, oh, I hate this and I don't like that and this is so frustrating and whatever, but like asking yourself over and over, what do I want instead?
Mhm.
And then acting from that place. It's much like growing a garden. It's like focus on what you want to grow. Sometimes you just have to take the plants out that aren't thriving and put something new in that will thrive there,
Mhm.
and focus on growing what you want. And in that circumstance, how I raised my family according to the Family Crest principles actually was really showing in action right then when my son came with his brand new baby and his nursing wife, and they just like stepped in and we did mutual aid and care for community and like we showed up and did that together and joyfully, not with like, oh,
Mhm.
this is heavy or this is hard or oh, we're having to be around a death, or like there
Mhm.
wasn't any of that. It was just like we were all rooted in our values, and so we're able to show up and feel like joyful,
Mhm.
even in a really sad circumstance, to feel joyful because we could be of service
Right.
and to be of service together.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Ugh, such a beautiful experience between us that I'll always treasure. And yeah,
Ooh, me
thanks.
too. Yeah, and I am so looking forward to ongoing conversations with you. Thank you so much
Me too.
for suggesting that we do just like casual conversations together and, you know, just make it easy. Like, let's just hop on Zoom and have a talk. Like, it doesn't need to be this big deal. And that's what is really working for me in my life right now. And so thank you for
Mhm.
being able to imagine a way to make it possible.
Right. Once again, we meet in a way that just, like lets us both be where we are and hopefully supports us both where we are. And
Yeah,
I just always have such nourishing conversations with you. So thanks. I
I
look
feel
forward to the next one.
me too. Jill, thank you so
Okay.
much for setting everything up. And
Yeah, of
can't
course.
wait to talk to you. Can't wait to see what we're going to talk about next.
Yeah, me too.
Hey, have a wonderful day.
Thanks. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Mm.
Okay.